June 6, 1944. 158,000 men are about to launch the largest amphibious invasion in human history. But what you're about to hear will change everything you thought you knew about D-Day. This wasn't a triumphant march to victory. This was a disaster held together by luck, lies, and the courage of men who had no idea how close they came to complete annihilation. The next 13 minutes will show you the catastrophe that almost was. Act 1. The Impossible Decision, 030. Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower is standing in a freezing room in Southwick House, England. It's 4 a.m. on June 5th. Rain hammers the windows. Wind howls outside. His chief meteorologist, Group Captain James Stagg, has just told him something impossible. There's a tiny window in the storm. 36 hours, maybe less. The weather that's been pinning them down for weeks might break just long enough to launch the invasion. But here's the nightmare. If Stagg is wrong, thousands of men will drown before they even reach the beach. If Eisenhower waits, the tides won't be right again for weeks. The troops are loaded on ships, seasick, terrified, ready to go. If he delays, morale collapses. Operational security crumbles. The Germans will figure out what's coming. And there's another problem no one talks about. Stalin. The Soviet Union has been bleeding for 3 years. 20 million Soviet citizens are dead. Stalin has been demanding a second front since 1942. He's starting to wonder if the Western Allies are deliberately letting Germany and the Soviet Union destroy each other. If this invasion fails, or if Eisenhower delays it again, Stalin might negotiate a separate peace with Hitler. The unthinkable becomes possible. Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union dividing Europe between them. Roosevelt knows it, Churchill knows it, and Eisenhower knows it. The pressure isn't just military, it's geopolitical. The entire post-war world order depends on what happens in the next 48 hours. Eisenhower gives the order. Okay, we'll go. But he's so uncertain that he writes a message taking full responsibility for the failure he expects. He dates it July 5th by mistake. His hand is shaking so badly he can't write the correct date. He keeps that note in his pocket as the invasion launches. Meanwhile, Operation Fortitude is reaching its climax. This is the most elaborate military deception in history, and it's either going to save the invasion or mean absolutely nothing. Here's what the Allies did. They created an entirely fictional army group. The 1st United States Army Group, commanded by George Patton, supposedly stationed in southeast England, preparing to invade Calais. But Patton isn't commanding anything. He's in disgrace after slapping a soldier with PTSD. So, the Allies used him as bait. They built hundreds of dummy landing craft out of canvas and wood, inflatable tanks that looked real from the air. They generated fake radio traffic, thousands of messages between fictional units. They had double agents feeding false information to German intelligence. The British even created a fake oil dock that would service an invasion fleet. They pumped oil into the sea on schedule to make it look operational. Hollywood set designers worked alongside military intelligence officers. They studied German reconnaissance patterns and placed fake equipment exactly where German photo analysts would see it. The operation was so detailed that they created fictional commanders with fake biographies, forged their signatures on documents, and had double agents report on their personalities. But here's the genius. The Allies didn't just create a fake invasion. They made the fake invasion more logical than the real one. Look at a map. Calais is the shortest distance across the English Channel. It's the most direct route to Germany. The Allies had been bombing the Pas-de-Calais region heavily, exactly what you do before an invasion. Normandy? It's farther away. The beaches have obstacles. The hedgerow country behind the beaches is a defender's paradise. Attacking Normandy makes less sense strategically. So when German intelligence saw evidence of both invasion forces, They believed Calais was the real target because it was the logical target. Normandy had to be the diversion. Hitler agreed. He became so convinced that he kept elite panzer divisions at Calais for weeks after the Normandy landings began, waiting for Patton's real invasion. But there was a wild card no one anticipated: Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. Rommel doesn't trust the intelligence reports. He studied the Allies. He knows they're capable of elaborate deceptions, and he has a terrible suspicion that Normandy is the real target. So in the months before the invasion, he's been fortifying the Normandy beaches like a man possessed. More obstacles, more mines, more bunkers. His engineers place over 6 million mines along the coast. He creates Rommel's asparagus, wooden poles planted in fields to prevent glider landings. He floods low-lying areas. He turns every beach exit into a kill zone. But Rommel has a problem. He doesn't have enough troops. Hitler won't give him operational control of the panzer divisions. The German high command is paralyzed by internal politics and competing theories about where the invasion will come. And then, Rommel makes a fateful decision. On June 4th, with storms raging across the Channel, he decides the weather is too bad for an invasion. His wife's birthday is June 6th. He hasn't seen her in months. He drives to Germany for a brief visit, planning to return in a few days. He leaves the beaches on June 5th. 24 hours later, the invasion begins. Act 6, The Airborne Disaster, 7:30. Before the beaches there are the paratroopers. In the darkness of June 6th, thousands of American and British airborne troops jump into Nazi-occupied France. The mission: secure the flanks, capture key bridges, prevent German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. It goes wrong immediately. Thick cloud cover, anti-aircraft fire, inexperienced pilots. The paratroopers are scattered across 50 miles of French countryside. Some units are dropped 20 miles from their beaches. Targets. Men land in flooded fields that Rommel created and drown, pulled under by their heavy equipment. Entire units are destroyed before they fire a shot. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions land as cohesive military formations, and within minutes dissolve into chaos. Officers can't find their men. Men can't find their units. General Maxwell Taylor lands with just a handful of soldiers. He spends hours wandering through hedgerows, collecting lost paratroopers like a teacher gathering scattered students. But here's where something unexpected happens. Act 7, Chaos as a Weapon, 9 a.m. The scattered drops create a nightmare for the Germans. They're receiving reports of paratroopers everywhere, small groups attacking from unexpected directions. They think they're facing a massive airborne invasion, when really, they're facing dozens of tiny units improvising desperately. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Cole lands with 75 men instead of 700. He's supposed to secure causeway exits from Utah Beach. With this tiny force, he can't possibly accomplish the mission by conventional tactics. So he doesn't use conventional tactics. He leads a wild bayonet charge that becomes legendary. His men are moving too fast for the Germans to coordinate a response. Across Normandy, similar stories unfold. Small groups of Americans, often led by junior officers or even sergeants, are accomplishing objectives through sheer audacity. And the French resistance, which British intelligence had worried might be ineffective, springs into action. They know which phone lines to cut, which rail lines to sabotage, which bridges to blow. On the night of June 5th-6th, they execute over 1,000 acts of sabotage. German commanders are trying to respond to the invasion, but they can't communicate. Phone lines are dead. Messengers are ambushed. Rail reinforcements are delayed by sabotage tracks. The chaos is becoming an Allied asset. Act 8, Omaha, the Edge of Disaster, 10:30. But at Omaha Beach, chaos means death. The pre-invasion bombardment has failed. Heavy bombers, flying through clouds, drop their payloads too far inland to avoid hitting the landing craft. The bombs land harmlessly in French fields, miles from the German defenses. The naval bombardment is too brief and too inaccurate. The specialized DD tanks, duplex drive tanks that can float, are launched too far from shore in rough seas. 27 out of 29 sink immediately, drowning their crews. When the first wave of infantry hits Omaha Beach at 6:30 a.m., they have no armored support, no craters to hide in, nothing. They're facing the German 352nd Infantry Division, combat veterans who've turned the bluffs overlooking the beach into interlocking fields of fire. Every exit is covered by machine guns, mortars, and artillery. The ramps drop, men pour out. And the slaughter begins. Act 9, The Longest Morning, 12:00. Imagine you're a 19-year-old from Ohio. You've been seasick for 12 hours. You're loaded down with 60 pounds of equipment. The ramp drops, and you see the men in front of you cut down before they hit the water. You jump anyway. The water is chest deep, freezing, mixed with blood and diesel fuel. Bullets hit the water around you like rain. Men are screaming, drowning, burning in flaming landing craft. You reach the beach, and there's nowhere to go. The seawall is 100 yards away. German machine gunners have perfect sight lines. Bodies are piling up at the water's edge. Your lieutenant is dead. Your sergeant is wounded. Your radio operator has been hit, and the radio is destroyed. You're cut off from command. You don't know if anyone else has made it ashore. You don't know if the invasion is succeeding or failing. All you know is that staying here means dying. This is the reality for thousands of men on Omaha Beach. General Omar Bradley is watching from the USS Augusta offshore. The reports coming in are catastrophic. Communications are breaking down. Landing craft are burning. Bodies are washing back out to sea. Some units have suffered 90% casualties in the first 30 minutes. Bradley faces a terrible choice. Keep sending men into the meat grinder, or evacuate the beach and abandon the entire operation. If he evacuates, the invasion fails. The political consequences are unthinkable. But if he keeps feeding troops into this disaster, he might lose an entire army for nothing. For 2 hours, Bradley considers evacuation, seriously considers it. The fate of World War II hangs on his decision. Meanwhile, on the beach, something is beginning to change. Act 11, The Nameless Heroes, 1445. There are no grand strategies being executed on Omaha Beach. There's no brilliant general coordination. What's happening is much more remarkable. Small groups of men, pinned down and terrified, start making individual decisions to move. Bangalore torpedoes, long tubes packed with explosives, finally blow gaps in the wire obstacles. A few men scramble through. Others follow. Destroyer captains, watching the disaster unfold, make a decision that violates every naval warfare doctrine. They drive their ships so close to shore they're scraping bottom, firing point-blank at German bunkers. USS Carmack, USS Doyle, USS McCook. They're so close that German artillery is hitting them at nearly flat trajectories. But they're destroying the German positions that have been massacring the infantry. On the beach, a colonel named George Taylor is shouting at men frozen behind obstacles. Two kinds of people are staying on this beach: those who are dead and those who are going to die. Now let's get the hell out of here. It's not inspirational in a movie sense. It's stark mathematics. Stay and die. Move and maybe die. The choice is obvious. Men start moving. Not in organized units. Those are shattered. In twos and threes. A sergeant here, a private there. They're not following orders because there are no orders to follow. They're moving because the alternative is waiting for death. Act 12, The Tide Turns, 1630. By 8:30 a.m., 2 hours after the first landing, Small groups have reached the bluffs. They're using whatever weapons they have, rifles, grenades, TNT charges, to attack the German positions from behind. The German defenders are realizing something terrifying. Americans are behind them. Their perfect defensive positions are being attacked from multiple directions. By noon, the exits from the beach are open. Not secure, they're still fighting, but open enough for men and equipment to move inland. By evening, 30,000 men are ashore at Omaha Beach. 10,000 casualties. Horrific, but the invasion hasn't failed. At Utah Beach, the landing is almost smooth by comparison. The currents push the invasion force 2,000 yards south of the planned landing site. This accident puts them in a lightly defended sector. The commander, Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., son of President Theodore Roosevelt, makes an instant decision. We'll start the war from right here. Utah Beach secures its objectives with only 200 casualties. Act 13. Hitler sleeps 1745. But the invasion's success hinges on something no Allied planner could have anticipated. Adolf Hitler's sleeping schedule. Hitler has been taking increasingly strong sleeping medications. He goes to bed late and sleeps until noon. His staff has standing orders not to wake him except in the most extreme emergencies. When the invasion begins at dawn, Hitler is asleep. His staff receives reports. They're alarmed, but they're terrified to wake the Führer. For 6 critical hours, no one can authorize moving the panzer divisions from Calais to Normandy. The military commanders don't have authority. Only Hitler can give that order. By the time Hitler wakes up around noon, the Allies have established a foothold. The crucial window for a counterattack is closing. And Hitler is still convinced this is a diversion. He believes Patton's Phantom Army at Calais is the real threat. He keeps elite divisions in place, waiting for an invasion that will never come. The deception holds for weeks. Even after the Normandy breakout begins, Hitler refuses to commit his reserves, convinced the real invasion is still coming at Calais. Let's talk about the world we barely avoided. If D-Day had failed, if Bradley had evacuated Omaha, if the Germans had counterattacked successfully, if Hitler had woken up earlier, what happens next? The Western Allies can't attempt another invasion for at least a year. The losses would be too catastrophic. The logistics would need complete rebuilding. But Stalin doesn't wait. The Red Army is already rolling west. In our timeline, they reach Berlin by May 1945. In this alternate timeline, with no Western Front to worry about, they might reach the Atlantic by 1946. Or worse, Stalin, convinced the Western Allies are useless, negotiates a separate peace with Hitler. The unthinkable becomes reality. Europe divided between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. The atomic bomb is still a year away from completion. Germany's jet fighter program is advancing. Their V-2 rocket program is operational. If they have another year, they might develop intercontinental ballistic missiles. The Cold War doesn't begin between the United States and Soviet Union. It begins between the Western Allies and a Nazi-Soviet axis. It's a nightmare scenario, and it was inches away from happening. Act 15, The Forgotten Factor, 2030. But there's another element that made D-Day possible, and it's rarely discussed in the triumphant narratives: the French resistance. We think of them as romantic figures, saboteurs in berets. The reality was much grimmer and much more crucial. For 4 years, French civilians lived under Nazi occupation, knowing that resistance meant torture and death. The Gestapo was efficient and brutal. Entire families were executed for harboring Allied agents. But thousands of French men and women chose resistance anyway. They mapped German positions at enormous personal risk. They hid Allied pilots shot down over France. They radioed intelligence to London. And on June 6th, they activated. Rail lines blown, phone cables cut, German convoys ambushed. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, one of Germany's most elite units, should have reached Normandy in 3 days. It took them 2 weeks because of resistance attacks and sabotage. Hundreds of French resistance fighters died, making that possible. Their names aren't on the memorials. Their stories aren't in the movies. But without them, the invasion might have collapsed in the first week. Let's talk about what victory cost. 10,000 Allied casualties on D-Day alone. By the end of the Battle of Normandy in August, the Allies suffered over 200,000 casualties. The German losses were catastrophic, over 400,000 casualties, including the near-complete destruction of multiple elite divisions. But the civilian cost is staggering and often forgotten. Normandy was home to 2 million French citizens. Allied bombing campaigns before and during the invasion killed over 20,000 French civilians. The city of Caen was supposed to be liberated on D-Day. Instead, it became a battleground. By the time the Allies secured it, 75% of the city was destroyed. French civilians cheered their liberation while digging through the rubble of their homes. This is the complexity that heroic narratives erase. Liberation came at a terrible price, paid not just by soldiers, but by the people being liberated. In the pockets of dead soldiers on Omaha Beach, medics found letters, final letters, written the night before the invasion. Young men, most barely out of high school, had written to their parents, their wives, their girlfriends. They knew the odds. They weren't naive. Dear Mom, by the time you read this, I'll either be in France or in heaven. I'm with good men. My dearest Sarah, if I don't make it back, know that every moment with you was worth it. Raise our daughter to be strong. Dad, I know you didn't want me to enlist, but some things are worth fighting for. Freedom is one of them. These weren't professional soldiers seeking glory. They were accountants, farmers, mechanics, students. They believed their sacrifice mattered. They believed the world they were fighting for was worth dying for. And they weren't wrong. Act 18, The Myth versus the Reality, 2430. Here's what popular culture gets wrong about D-Day. It wasn't inevitable. It wasn't a steamroller of American industrial might crushing inferior Germans. It was a desperate gamble that almost failed. The planning was imperfect. The intelligence was incomplete. The weather was terrible. The execution was chaotic. It succeeded because of thousands of individual acts of courage. A destroyer captain who drove his ship into shallow water. A sergeant who charged a machine gun nest when his lieutenant was killed. A radio operator who kept transmitting even after being wounded. A French civilian who cut a phone line, knowing he'd be executed if caught. No single hero saved D-Day. Thousands of people, most of whose names we'll never know, made decisions in moments of terror that collectively achieved the impossible. But let's give credit where it's due. The strategic deception was brilliant. Operation Fortitude didn't just fool the Germans on June 6th, it kept them fooled for weeks. Even as Allied forces were breaking out of Normandy, Hitler was still holding divisions at Calais. The Allies had studied German command structure and exploited its weaknesses. They knew Hitler micromanaged. They knew he distrusted his generals. They knew German intelligence relied heavily on signals intercept. So they created an entire fake signals network. They knew the Germans would intercept it. They wanted them to intercept it. They created fake agent networks, knowing German counterintelligence would identify them. They fed those compromised networks false information, knowing the Germans would believe intelligence they'd stolen more than intelligence handed to them. It was a psychological warfare campaign of breathtaking sophistication. But it required something else. Time. Years of preparation. Patient intelligence work. Building fake identities that would withstand scrutiny. The victory on June 6, 1944, was built on decisions made in 1942 and 1943. Act 20, The German Perspective, 27-0. Let's not forget, There were 19-year-old Germans in those bunkers too. Most weren't Nazi ideologues. They were conscripts, far from home, terrified. Many German soldiers had been on the Eastern Front. They'd seen the apocalyptic warfare against the Soviets. Being stationed in France felt like a reprieve. And then, the largest invasion fleet in history appeared off the coast. From their perspective, it was hopeless. The sea was covered with ships. The sky was full of Allied aircraft. They knew they were going to die or be captured. Some fought fanatically, believing Nazi propaganda about what Allied capture meant. Others surrendered at the first opportunity, grateful to be taken by Americans or British rather than Soviets. The 352nd Infantry Division at Omaha Beach fought with desperate courage. They inflicted catastrophic casualties, but they were facing an enemy with unlimited reinforcements and total air superiority. By evening, survivors were retreating inland, their defensive positions overrun. Most would be killed or captured in the coming weeks. War makes victims of everyone who fights it, regardless of which side they're on. Here's what D-Day wasn't: the end of the war. The fighting in Normandy was brutal. The hedgerow country, small fields surrounded by ancient earthwork walls overgrown with vegetation, was a defender's paradise. Every field was a potential ambush. Progress was measured in yards per day. The Allied advance that military planners expected to take weeks took months. The Germans fought for every inch of ground. The Battle of Normandy didn't end until late August. 2.5 months of grinding combat. By then, the Allies had suffered casualties equivalent to several D-days. And Germany still had 9 months of fight left. The Battle of the Bulge, in December 1944, would be one of the bloodiest battles American forces ever fought. D-Day opened the door, but walking through that door cost another year of war, and hundreds of thousands of lives. 80 years later, what does D-Day mean? It means that impossible things can be achieved when people are willing to sacrifice for something larger than themselves. It means that courage isn't the absence of fear. Every soldier on those landing craft was terrified, but acting despite that fear. It means that deception and intelligence can matter as much as firepower. That preparation and planning matter. That individual initiative can compensate for institutional failures. But it also means that victory is never clean. That even just wars have costs that echo for generations. That the people who pay the highest price are often the ones who have the least say in starting the conflict. The civilians of Normandy, the French resistance fighters, the 19-year-olds from Kansas and Kentucky who died on Omaha Beach. But they paid for ending it. Act 23, The Lessons, 3045. If there's a lesson from the D-Day catastrophe that almost was, it's this: success is fragile. The difference between triumph and disaster can be measured in hours, sometimes minutes. If Hitler had woken up 6 hours earlier, if Rommel hadn't left for his wife's birthday, if the weather had been worse, if Bradley had evacuated Omaha Beach, if the French resistance hadn't sabotaged German communications. Any one of those variables changes, and we're living in a different world. The soldiers who landed on June 6th didn't know they were going to win. They couldn't see the future. They just knew they had a job to do, and they did it. That's not a comfortable lesson. We want to believe great historical events have clear outcomes, that the good guys always win. D-Day reminds us that history is contingent, that small decisions cascade into world-changing consequences, that courage matters, that sacrifice matters, that sometimes the difference between freedom and tyranny is a group of terrified young men deciding to move forward when every instinct screams to stay down. Operation Overlord succeeded, but calling it a triumph erases the chaos, the terror, the razor-thin margin between victory and catastrophe. It wasn't a steamroller. It was a desperate gamble. It wasn't inevitable. It was improbable. The men who fought on June 6, 1944, didn't perform superhuman feats. They did what had to be done, knowing the odds, accepting the risks. 10,000 of them didn't come home. The catastrophe that almost was didn't happen because of one factor. It didn't happen because of brilliant generals or perfect planning or American industrial might. It didn't happen because thousands of individual people, soldiers, sailors, pilots, resistance fighters, intelligence officers, even weather forecasters, did their jobs under impossible circumstances. That's the real story of D-Day, not the heroic myth, but the complicated, terrifying, miraculous truth. The largest invasion in history almost failed. The fact that it didn't is what makes it truly extraordinary.